Okay, so I was recently reading a memoir from a comedy person, Guy Branum's memoir, My Life as a Goddess, and I was really liking it. I don't typically read memoirs of people I don't like. I don't want to spend that much time with them and their brain. Guy Branum's great. I think Talk Show the Game Show is really great. But when I was reading this, he talked about how he looked into reading some books about comedy and humor, and then he said that there's only one good book on comedy. He says this, Limon, he says that this is the only good book on comedy, which is stand-up comedy in theory or objection in America. So, yes, this is a good book. It's one of the most dense academic treatises on comedy that we have. It is good. There's a whole thing in here about how if you laugh at something, you can't take it back, which is like a fun concept. And if you laugh, you can't say, oh no, that's actually not funny, you laughed. And so it's a cool exploration of the immediacy and the purity of laughter. Like, it's a solid book, but it made me really mad that Guy Branum said that there's only one good book about comedy, because there are a lot of good books on comedy, and I'm gonna prove that today. So these are all my comedy books. A lot of them are memoirs, so I'm gonna skip over those for now, and I'm gonna skip over books about like specific comedians, biographies and analyses, but there are more good books on comedy. So 1 minute while I collect them all. For sure, I didn't read that one yet. 100%, kind of a memoir, but it counts. Ugh. Heavy. This one is good, but it's kind of complicated. Hold on. There's one more shelf. Okay. So these are books that are good on comedy. Oh, hold on. And these too. So I'm going to go through these books, and Guy Branum, I love you, but you should read some of them. Okay. Okay, hold on. Actually, it'd be cool if they were like in frame somehow, but they're heavy. Okay, hold on. Oh, this is a bad idea. Okay, we're gonna start. First book on comedy that's really good. On the real side, Mel Watkins. Mel Watkins is really wonderful. I've actually had the pleasure of meeting him and working with him, and this is an amazing book. It's a history of African American comedy, from slavery to Chris Rock, which is insane. But it's super readable. It kind of feels like a textbook, but when you're reading it, it's so dense with information. And he shits on Andrew Dice Clay, which is really fun. Well, technically he shits on people who like Andrew Dice Clay, so no fighting in the comments. But I highly really recommend this book. African American humor is so central to all of American humor, because guess what? Humor comes from two cultures mainly, and it's these two. So obviously there are exceptions, like obviously there are other people, but come on, let's be honest with ourselves. I haven't read this book. Maybe it's good, the Jewish one. Haven't gotten around to it. It was a gift. But On the Real Side is the first book that Guy Branum should read. And anyone, obviously. That goes over there. Next one. This is the one that I said was sort of cheating, because it is a memoir, but it's so much more than a memoir. This is, I think, the best book about stand-up. It's Steve Martin, Born Standing Up, and there's just some really amazing quotes in here. Oh, and a postcard that a friend wrote to me once. We'll leave that in there. But I'll insert my favorite quote from this book. But it's a really beautiful look at humor. You know, there's obviously a lot of memoir in it, but It's a really philosophical take because I don't know if you guys know, but Steve Martin is insanely smart. Oh my God. So highly, highly recommend. And it's so sober because he talks about when he had to quit and how he would go to shows in the early 80s after he kind of boomed, and there'd be open seats in the back, and he wasn't used to seeing that. So it's really vulnerable. And guy, this one too. Next, okay, if you were to look at this book, you might not believe me, but it's got like stickers all over it because it's really hard to find. But this is Eddie Tafoya's The Legacy of the Wisecrack. This book has given me so much. I drove cross country twice actually, but the first time I drove cross country, I went through Las Vegas, New Mexico, where this guy lives, like out of my way on my drive to interview him and to meet with him. And he's just been really wonderful. My field is small, so I know a lot of people that have written about stand-up. But this book is fabulous. It is one of the first books I ever read that takes stand-up comedy really seriously. And I don't just mean like it's boring, because there are books about comedy that are boring and serious. But this book treats stand-up comedy the way that other art forms get treated every day. And it goes through the history of stand-up, it even has a chapter called a prehistory of stand-up. So it talks about minstrelsy and vaudeville and the Borscht Belt and all of these things that helped create this amazing art form that I love so much. Eddie's great. This book is great. It's, you know, it's a little more like rascally than the others, but I super recommend it to anyone who wants to learn more about comedy. Honestly, I would recommend starting here. This is a really great foundation. And I mean, good luck finding it, but it's awesome. Guy. Next one. This is Comedy at the Edge. This is Richard Zoglin. I've interviewed Richard Zoglin too. Comedians and comedy writers and journalists have been so nice to me over the past like 5-6 years while I've been doing this to give me their time. But this is a great book about stand-up comedy in the 70s, which is where stand-up comedy like really, really blossomed. Yes, Bob Hope, yes, Lenny Bruce, like yes, Mort Saul, yes, these earlier people, but the 70s is when stand-up became what we now know it to be. So highly, highly recommend. Zoglin is also really wicked smart. I think he wrote for Time Magazine. He was like an editor at Time Magazine. Am I right about that? Yes, he's an editor and writer at Time. So he's great. He likes Bob Hope a lot more than I do. I think he thinks Bob Hope is the first stand-up, which is a fun argument. If you've read anything I've written, I talk a lot about how much comedy scholars disagree on who the first stand-up comedian was and how enlightening it is when you think about all their criteria, because comedy is really hard to define, and stand-up comedy is especially hard to define, and I hate my part right now. Stand-up comedy is especially hard to define, so if you know who someone thinks the first stand-up comedian was, you're going to learn a lot about what they think stand-up is. For example, I often say that Mark Twain was the first stand-up comedian, and doesn't that tell you a lot about what I think stand-up is? It does. Okay, so this. Next. This massive one. Okay, yes, this is a coffee table book, because it's huge, and yes, it's like a lot of pictures, so it's a picture book. But there's still really cool information in here. And it is a look back. It's very America. And it is not just stand-up. It is comedy at large. So like Lucille Ball is profiled in here. But it's a book that profiles people. It has like an accompanying video series, I think. But hold on, let me find a page. Look, there's text too. It's not just pictures. And this book I just devoured. It gives a lot of credence to all the art forms that were around stand-up, and it's fun. Highly recommend. Obviously, it's not like as academic as the others, but it's freaking massive. You can read this one too. Read it. And it looks cute, you know, on a table, so decor. Next. Okay. I've read this, it's been a while, so I actually probably can't defend this book. I'm What I remember, though, about this book is about the comedy strike, and Mitzi Shore. Yeah, because Mitzi Shore didn't pay people much because it's a privilege to perform at the Comedy Store. Okay. This is the one that was made into the TV show that I never watched and everyone told me to, because I really don't like comedy on TV, guys. Usually, like, maybe it's just me being a hipster, probably. I never watched this show, and I didn't get very far in Miss Maisel, and people ask me all the time about them. Maybe that's why I don't like them. People just ask me about them too much. Anyway, I can't honestly talk about it because I don't remember it that well. Skip that one. This, oh my god, I've been wanting to talk about this forever, and maybe I'll do a whole series on it one day, but this isn't like the others. This isn't a secondary source. This is primary source, baby. This is primary. Like, if Guy Branum wants to read any books on comedy, this is like reading every book on comedy because it's an anthology. So, I mean, if you want to understand comedy and humans and philosophy and anthropology, this is what you read, because it starts with what Plato said about comedy, and then it goes on and on and on through history. Horace, Dante, Erasmus. I need to read all of this. Butler, Moliere, Dryden, Kant, obviously, Thackeray, Mark Twain, what up, my boy? And then basically up to now, up to 2015. Wow. So yeah, this is everything, man. This is like everything. I guess this doesn't count for Guy Branum's books about comedy, because this is like comedy. I guess it's not, though, because comedy is the actual, like, this is a book about comedy, but it's not a book about comedy. You know what I mean? Anyway, next. I'm going to save this one for last because you know it's coming. This book is really fun. This is one of the first books about comedy that I ever read. This is about indie comedy. So there's so many books about comedy in the 70s and 80s. This is like the only book I've ever found about comedy in the 90s, man. It's about alt. So it's like Maria Bamford, Patton Oswalt, Brian Posehn, Zach Galifianakis, David Cross, Bob Odenkirk. It's like the cool hipster 90s. And the book is all about like what hipster alt comedy in the 90s learned from music, learned from like the alt music scene, because that's like what they learned. Highly recommend. No longer property of the Denver Public Library, if you were wondering. But this one is really fun. I'd recommend this book too. Guy Branum. By the way, I don't mean this to be like sassy against Guy Branum, because I do love him and I think he's really smart. But I want to share my books with him. If you're ever in New York, I will lend some to you. Guy only. That's not an offer to anyone. Okay, these two. If you're a nerd, you're familiar with these books. These are the very short introduction series that Oxford does. If you like anything, there's probably a book about them. Let me just for example, let's see if there's a list of all of the very short introductions. There is. Look at all these things. Can you see it? Can you see it? Am I like Grace Helbig? Can you see it? I watch a lot of her. Anyway, though, Christianity, the Eye, folk music, food, American history, Australia, autism, Buddhism, cancer, chaos, children's lit, Descartes, deserts, nothing. Nothing could be cool. Anyway, games. Ooh, game theory would be fun. Heidegger. Utopianism. Anyway, there's a million, and I got the one on comedy and the one on humor. Comedy and humor are different things. This is more philosophical, anthropological, biological, right? And then this is more like about plays and performance. So these are both good. They're dense as crap. This book was really helpful in my Philosophies on Humor video. The videos I made where I talk about humor philosophy through SpongeBob. So this was really great. This is really great. Put them in your bag, keep it with you, read it while you're at the dentist, in public transit, all that stuff. These are fun. And they're cute as hell. So read these. Last one. Every comedy nerd has this book. I don't need to tell you about it. I actually have two. One hard copy and one paperback because I saw it at a thrift store for $2 and I was like, hey, maybe I'll get this in paperback too. I'm complicated about this book. I disagree with some things. I don't know. I've never met Kliph Nesteroff. I tried to interview him once and he said no. But maybe he was busy. I don't know. But this is the most comprehensive book you're going to find. It starts in vaudeville, so you can read this book and then read this book if you want a full timeline. This is another book where what the guy thinks the OG comedian is, that wasn't a good sentence, who he thinks the first stand-up comedian was, elucidates a little bit about him, right? So I've heard, hold on. Okay, yeah, I've heard some people say Moms Mabley was the first stand-up comedian. He says that Frank Fay was the first stand-up comedian. I've heard Charlie Case. I've heard Bob Hope. I've heard Mark Twain. It's an exercise in futility because it doesn't matter, because art forms don't really have like starting points. They evolve and they grow and they change, and that's part of the cool stuff. I don't know where I was going with that, but he thinks it's Frank Fay, and that's where this book kind of starts. This book, he originally, as far as I know, wanted to write a book about like the mob and how the mob ran comedy clubs in like 30s, 40s, 50s. And then the publisher was just like, just write a book about the history of comedy, stand-up in America. And he was like, okay. Maybe I'm wrong. Kliph, if you're watching, comment down below and tell me how wrong I am. But it's sort of like a encyclopedia textbook thing. It's dense. It's not as readable as some of the others, but it is packed with information. Although, who was it that I was disappointed by how little? Oh, Dane Cook. When I was doing my big video on Dane Cook, I was disappointed that he's just like a paragraph in this. Like him or dislike him, he deserves more than a paragraph in the history of stand-up, y'all. He was like everything for a few years. I don't know. That's my hot take. When I write a book about stand-up, he's going to be like a chapter, for sure. So here's some books. Hold on. They're really heavy. Ooh. Here's some books about comedy to read. One of them's backwards. You know which one it is. It's the last one. No! Steve, come back. Here's some books about comedy to read. Stop watching my videos and go read books about comedy and get real smart and then make videos and compete with my channel. Honestly, I'd be fine with that. I want more comedy nerd friends. Okay, bye! Bye! Thanks for watching, Guy Branum. Go back on MFM. You were really fun talking about law.